It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be part of what is an inspiring event. And I have to say, Shimon, it's no surprise that you would create an annual event in Israel where the world's leading thinkers, whether it's on science or medicine or economy or energy or environment or culture or communications or conflict resolution or politics, would come and gather here. This is a remarkable gathering. In many ways, it's a true meeting of the minds from around the globe. And I feel fortunate to say that I actually was involved with the very beginning of these events when you created them 3 years ago. Mr. President, before I start, I want to convey to you a personal greeting from President Obama. He gives you his best, and I have to say that he marvels, along with all of us, that at 87 years of age, you maintain a vision, a vitality, and the moral courage to continue to shape the future of your country. Now, Mr. President, you and I have known each other a long time, more than a quarter of a century. And as I was flying here, I was thinking about one of the early episodes that really shaped my impression of you. You may not remember this, but in 1986, I came to Israel with George H.W. Bush, who was then vice president, and you had us go down to Sde-Boker and visit what was Ben-Gurion's kibbutz, where he retired to, where he was buried. And you may recall that in his small library, you described Ben-Gurion. You described how he was your mentor. You described how he was small in stature and yet a towering figure because he faced enormous challenges and opposition, but he never shied from making historic decisions. And I remember this very vividly. You said, because Israel will always face challenges and because it has a very small room for error, it will always need leaders like that. I have to tell you, Shimon, I know that that's been the philosophy that has guided you, and obviously, as you've seen, it's a message that I've carried with me for the last 25 years. Here we are today, 25 years later, and you're still leading your nation, you're still shaping the future, and you're still believing that Israel must be a light unto the nations. But I think that you would agree that Ben-Gurion and Israel's other founding fathers would find it very difficult to imagine, much less comprehend, how far Israel has come. On a perilous patch of desert with very sparse natural resources, you have built perhaps the world's most innovative economy, a $220 billion engine that is growing at almost 5% a year. You've cultivated the talents of 11 Nobel Prize winners. You have more startups per capita than any nation on the planet, more firms on the NASDAQ exchange than anyone except the United States, and more U.S. patents per capita than any country, including my own. But numbers can only tell part of the story, because as you in this room know better than anyone, the driving force behind Israel's remarkably dynamic economy is its people. It takes gifted dreamers to bring dreams to life. I recently learned of an extraordinary project led by one of your scientists who has had a fascination his whole life with butterflies. Melding his work and his passion, he designed a mechanical, solar-powered butterfly roughly the size of a pigeon that could gather intelligence. Or consider the work of Shai Agassi, someone, Shimon, you know very well, a creative entrepreneur whose path-breaking work on electric automobiles began not far from here, and yet he's fueled innovation around the world on this very issue. As this conference so aptly reflects, Israel, like the United States, is a country of remarkable achievement, a country where what can be imagined can be acted upon and realized. It is a country that is perpetually expanding the bounds of the possible. And small wonder, Mr. President, that you attract the leading thinkers and doers from around the world to come here. If it is cutting edge, it is taking shape here. Now, I think it's fair to say that we're gathered at a time in this region that is remarkable. What many thought was impossible is now happening all around us. And I think it's worth pausing for a moment to reflect on what in fact is happening in this region. The peoples of this area, in Tunis, in Cairo, in Benghazi, and in Damascus, are demanding a voice in shaping their future. They understandably are tired of having their aspirations unmet and their dignity assaulted. They are tired of being left behind. Many of you will remember that the Arab Human Development Report in 2002 spoke of three great deficits: a deficit in education, in democracy, and women's rights. And these deficits served as a millstone around the necks of these societies. 9 years later, many of these demands are being made in the streets. And in a sense, what we're seeing is an acknowledgement of those shortcomings and the yearning to overcome them. Now, I know that here in Israel and elsewhere, there's understandable concern about the developments that are taking place in this area. President Obama has spoken of the uncertainty of this moment and how no one can fully predict how the developments will unfold. But he has also reminded us that even if there will be inevitable setbacks, this is a moment in the Middle East of extraordinary promise. The United States has calibrated its response to these developments accordingly. While a one-size-fits-all approach is neither desirable nor even possible, given the nuances and the complexities that characterize each country, we have been guided at every turn by three simple core principles. First, we oppose violence. Second, we support people's aspirations for basic universal rights, including the right to free speech and the right to freely assemble. Third, we urge the governments of the region to embrace reforms that respond to their people's aspirations. We have been inspired by the citizens of Egypt and Tunisia who use mass mobilization and moral authority to overcome tyranny and to take the first tentative steps towards democracy. Elsewhere, as you all very well know, repressive regimes have turned their guns on their own people in a desperate bid to cling to power at all costs. As President Obama has said, this is the old way of doing business, and it's the wrong side of history. There is no going back. In Libya, the United States led the formation of a formidable coalition, including a unique collaboration between our NATO allies and Arab states, and this coalition prevented a murderous regime from carrying out a humanitarian catastrophe. Gaddafi has lost his legitimacy, and he must go. And this steadfast effort will continue until the Libyan people are no longer under threat from their government. In Syria, President Assad, with Iranian help, has waged a brutal crackdown on dissent and refused to implement the reforms being demanded in the cities and towns around his country. And yet, in the face of this brutality, the people of Syria refuse to back down and continue to demand their rights. So together with our partners, the United States has deployed a range of measures, including unprecedented sanctions, to pressure Assad and those around him to halt the violence. He now faces a clear choice: end the violence and begin democratic reforms, or get out of the way. In Bahrain, a long-standing U.S. partner in promoting Gulf security, we denounced the government's crackdown on the opposition and insisted on accountability for those who have violated citizens' basic rights. And we continue to encourage all sides to seize the opportunity for an inclusive national dialogue on reform. Both efforts to establish accountability for what's happened and to forge an inclusive national dialogue are now slated to begin very soon. We are encouraged by these developments and will do what we can to be supportive of them. But beyond these countries that have drawn the world's attention these past few months, there is a powerful message that needs to be understood. The people of this region are aware, They are connected, and they have found their voice. They are demanding to be treated as citizens, not subjects. And those who seek to govern now must recognize that reality and respect their demands. In the face of the Arab Spring, Iran is seeing increasingly that it's not Iranian power, ideas, or ideals that are influencing the region, but rather the power of universal ideas and rights that Iran denies its own people. These are ideas and rights that the United States will advance at every turn. A region that embraces rather than diminishes the power of universal rights is a region that is more safe and secure, and it's a region that is profoundly in America's interests. We are vigilant about the threats, the full range of threats that Iran poses, but we're also mindful of Iran's weaknesses. This is a new Middle East, and two lessons stand out. First, this period has exposed as a myth the long-standing article of faith that autocracy, with all of its flaws, could somehow guarantee stability. It cannot. And second, in this region, the status quo is never static. That last point, that the status quo is not sustainable, is also true for one final issue that I want to address. It's the elusive pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians and Israel and its Arab neighbors. I have dealt with this issue for many years. With so many changes creating so many uncertainties, I can well understand the impulse to stand pat, to avoid taking risks, to believe that one should wait until everything takes shape and you see what's going to happen. But at this pivotal moment, the greatest risk of all would be to sit back and do nothing. Demographic trends cannot be waited out or wished away, and they cannot be denied. They are facts, and they have implications for Israel remaining both Jewish and democratic, particularly if the current realities between Israelis and Palestinians do not change. Second, the threat of rockets and missiles grows by the day. The rockets and missiles are more accurate today than they were 2 years ago. They have more range than they had 2 years ago. They have more payload than they have 2 years ago, but they won't have as much as they will have 2 years from now. Given that reality, isn't it better to pursue peace and thereby discredit the narrative of those who believe in rejection and validate the narrative of those who believe in coexistence? And isn't it better to pursue this sooner rather than later? Lastly, as a new generation of regional leaders emerge, shouldn't they see that peace is a possibility and not an impossibility? Or as President Obama said, in a region undergoing profound change in which peace can no longer be made with just one or two leaders, for peace to be sustainable, the Arab public must see that it is possible. That is why President Obama laid out his principles for resuming negotiations. He knows that it is, in his words, and I'm going to quote, up to Israelis and Palestinians to take action, and that no peace can be imposed on them, not by the United States, not by anybody else, unquote. But he also knows and said that without a credible peace process to serve as an alternative, again, without a credible peace process to serve as an alternative, and I quote, the march to isolate Israel internationally and the impulse of the Palestinians to abandon negotiations will continue to gain momentum. And for us to have leverage with the Palestinians, to have leverage with the Arab states and with the international community, the basis for negotiations has to hold out the prospect of success, unquote. The President laid out such a basis for addressing two key issues, territory and security. This approach is premised on the belief that if Palestinians know the general territorial outlines of their future state, and if Israelis know that their basic security needs can be met, that will provide a foundation for negotiations to succeed. Now, as you all know, the President spoke about the 1967 lines and mutually agreed swaps. He stated the obvious when he said, by definition, this means that the parties will negotiate a border that is different from the one that existed on June 4, 1967. Such a formula, 1967 lines and mutually agreed swaps, the President said, and I'm going to quote again, allows the parties themselves to account for the changes that have taken place over the last 44 years. It allows the parties themselves to take account of those changes, including the demographic realities on the ground and the needs of both sides, unquote. The ultimate goal, the President went on to say, quote, is two states for two peoples. Israel as a Jewish state and the homeland of the Jewish people, and the state of Palestine as the homeland of the Palestinian people, each state enjoying self-determination, mutual recognition, and peace. The President also understands one immutable reality. For Israel to take risks for peace, it must be secure. He made it very clear that Israel must be able to defend itself by itself against any threat. And he spoke not only about our unshakable commitment to Israel, but he also said that in word and in deed, we have been unwavering in our support of Israel's security. Now, I have served in 5 administrations in the United States, Republican and Democratic, and I can tell you that our current support for and our cooperation with Israel on security is simply unprecedented. That is a fact. It is a fact that may not always be noticed, but it is a fact, and I am proud of that fact. It reflects the reality that cooperation on security serves both of our country's interests, and it is also an ongoing testament to our readiness to stand by Israel. But I also know one other fact, that there can be no sustainable security without a lasting peace. Now, I remain hopeful. I remain hopeful because, like you, Shimon, I can envision what a new Middle East might mean. A new Middle East that begins to live up to the aspirations of its people, aspirations to have real opportunity and to have a different future. And I believe that while change is often unsettling, it need not be something to fear. Peace and reform go hand in hand. They are mutually reinforcing. That doesn't mean we're on the cusp of some breakthrough. There is a lot of hard work to be done and hard choices to be made by all sides. And there are more pitfalls on the path to peace than I can detail here. But it does mean, as Ben-Gurion believed and as the demonstrators in Cairo, Tunis, and elsewhere across the region have shown throughout this season of change, that those determined to tackle daunting challenges can succeed even when others consider it to be impossible. As we meet here in Israel, where so often what many have assumed would be impossible has been turned into reality, why shouldn't this also be the case? Thank you very much.